My name is Emmy Nicholson. I'm the Online Training Associate at the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative, or ELTI, ELTI, and I'm your moderator for today. And also present here today are my colleagues. We have Jillian Bloomfield, who's the ELTI Associate Director of Online Programs. We also have Abby York. She's the ELTI Program Administrator. And we have Frederick Aday, or Fred. He's our postgraduate associate here at ELTI. We're pleased to welcome you today to the third session of a four-part webinar series titled Agroforestry and Carbon, Addressing Climate Change Through Tree-Based Agriculture in Tropical Regions. This series is brought to you in collaboration with the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture. So just to go through our outline today, on April 4th, Fred moderated the introductory theme for this webinar, which was Agroforestry as a Climate Solution. And last week, on April 11th, we had Ari Gavin, who moderated the theme of Designing Agroforestry for Carbon Sequestration. Then today, April 18th, 2024, we're going to be talking a little bit about connecting agroforestry projects to the carbon market. If you have any questions today, we're going to answer them at the end of the webinar. But if we don't get to your questions today, do not worry. We will be logging them for a Q&A session with all panelists from all previous 3 webinars, and we'll be going through those then. All of these sessions are also recorded and will be posted on Yale ELTI's YouTube channel. So feel free to check that out there and register for our last session here at the link down below. To formally begin today's webinar, we are joined by our speakers who will impart their knowledge and expertise on connecting agroforestry projects to the carbon market. So let's virtually give our hands to Peter Umunay, who's a senior environmental specialist at the Global Environmental Facility in the United States. We also have joining us is Emma van de Ven. She's the head of strategy and knowledge and networks at Rabobank Acorn in the Netherlands. Thank you both so much for joining us. And yes, I love to see the emojis and reactions in the chat. Thank you, thank you. So the agenda for today, this session is divided into 3 parts. We'll start with a 15-minute presentation by Dr. Peter Umunay. Then we'll have another approximately 15-minute presentation from Emma van de Ven. Lastly, we'll have a joint Q&A session with both speakers, and that'll last about 20 to 30 minutes long. So prepare your questions and we'll address what we have time for towards the end of the session. To start with Peter, Peter will be presenting on this theme for today, connecting agroforestry projects to the carbon market. So Dr. Peter Umunay is a senior environmental specialist at the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, where he manages food land use restoration, or FOLUR, and food system integrated programs. Peter supports GEF's mandate to generate global environmental benefits under the biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation focal areas. He brings over 15 years of work experience with international organizations, academic and research institutions, and governments. Peter has contributed to around 30 scientific publications in the area of forest-climate nexus, land use finance, and sustainable commodities. He holds a Master in Science and PhD from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, now known as the Yale School of the Environment. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen while Jillian prepares the video that you've very graciously recorded for us. And for everyone attending here, our speakers have pre-recorded their presentations for broadcast during the session to ensure any accessibility with subtitles and eliminate any potential internet connectivity issues. So Peter, if you would like to greet us or show your microphone in camera, feel free to say hi while Jillian prepares the video.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here, and I hope the presentation will give you a bit of background in terms of what topic we want to address today, and also I will be around for any questions you might have. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending. Over to you.
Thank you.
And good afternoon, depending on where you are attending this webinar from, and welcome to this third series of webinar. Today, speaking on connecting agroforestry to project market, to carbon market. My name is Peter Umunay, and I work for the Global Environment Facility based in Washington, D.C., where I lead the portfolio on agriculture and food system. So I just wanted to start with the key concept and potentially a quick overview of the things that I'll be talking about throughout my presentation. The first concept is, of course, carbon offset, which are reduction in net carbon emissions, of course, in CO2 equivalent, that are created through project that either avoid emissions or remove carbon from the atmosphere. And once those offsets are verified and registered, they become now carbon credit, which then can be traded or sold in carbon markets. Three types of forest project. In this case, afforestation and reforestation, avoided conversion, and improve forest management. Of course, each of them has its own methodology and verification processes, depending on which standard you use. And agroforestry is recognized as afforestation and afforestation activity, even though some standard also recognize this as agricultural projects. And just to be clear, all of these offset projects must meet a certain requirement to be eligible, including additionality, permanence, measurability, and a non-leakage. The architecture looks like what you can see from that graphic, which very much you have the carbon project, in this case agroforestry. You need to link up with the carbon developers. You need to make this into the platforms that we call carbon registries, and then this will then be traded into the carbon market. So when it comes to agroforestry as carbon offset project, there are upstream two major things to know: non-existing agroforestry, where you want to use an adoption of agroforestry practices, and then existing agroforestry, where you need to change in the management or avoid risk of removal. So in case of adoption, then you will have to establish trees in a very degraded land or agricultural land. In terms of where there is an existing agroforestry, you need to change the management in terms of increasing the tree biomass or increasing the tree cover in a rotational agroforestry system. And in the case of risk of removal, what you do is really to minimize the risk of tree removal by conserving the trees that already exist in the farm. So the carbon market now. Virtually all international climate finance is in the form of activity-based climate finance or outcome-based climate finance. Activity-based climate finance typically is in the form of loans, the grant, equity or guarantees that cover the upfront cost in terms of project preparation, project commissioning, verifications, and so on. And sometimes these grants are limited. So the outcome-based finance then can play a very important role in really channeling the money to project developers. And then if you can look at from that graph, there is international public climate finance, which are very dedicated climate finance, sometimes coming from concessional finance or the UNFCCC financial mechanism, such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility where I work, the Adaptation Fund, and to some extent, the Climate Investment Fund. But there are also development banks that can provide such concessional finance or grant, but even though some of them also goes to, some of them also use this to the market transaction as well. And then when it comes to result-based finance, there are public and the private sector, and mostly private sector here is in terms of investment that seeking commercial returns, and for public is just domestic government that are spending to climate-related activities. So carbon markets, there are two. There are voluntary carbon market space, and which is now pretty much widely used. And there is also compliance market that is coming now very strongly with the Article 6 and then Corsair. So if you look at the activity-based finance and the result-based finance, you will see the supply, a very good distinction between the supply and the demand. And in between, there are intermediaries that have to facilitate the carbon market transactions. So the question is, how do you verify and issue those carbon credits? The first thing is the emission reduction credit. That is really carbon credits, which are those that are estimated into carbon dioxide, of course, and they are very much determined against the counterfactual baseline that is verified by the third party, but also issued using a registry or the platforms that I was talking about. And then the result-based finance comes in and they provide money to pay for the result if the project has achieved emission reductions. So the cycle is very clear. So project design, define the project, activities, and so on. You register that to the standard or national registries that has to be monitored, reported, and verified by the third party for this to be issued and then goes to carbon market. So the monitoring, reporting, and the verification called MRV system is very important in the carbon market. Let's look into that very closely. So when it comes to monitoring, reporting, and verification system, there is a basic equation that was defined by the IPCC. So really meaning the greenhouse gas emissions equal activity data, which are the quantitative measure of level of activity that result in greenhouse gas emissions during a specific period of time, multiply by emission factors, which are very much coefficients that convert those activity data to carbon emissions, so biomass or carbon emissions equivalents. These are the basic formula from the IPCC. But now, how do you estimate emission reduction? So to estimate emission reductions, there are two things. One is defining the historical baseline or historical emissions. And then you can have the crediting period, so the period by which you will receive payment for. And then these historical emissions can be 10 years, 5 years, depending on the standard that you use. Then it's a linear projection for the business as usual that will be compared then when you implement activities. So once you have implemented the activities, then you will have the counterfactual, especially ex ante, that's what we call it during the project registration. So you see those the gray dot, which is emission scenarios, and then the real emission when you come to during the implementation, the monitoring. That will include then greenhouse gas emissions and the removal estimate that we'll call a current emission, which are the black dots. And then those calculations will be then the emission reduction that you'll be paid for. Let's look at a real world example. For example, here, using the ArtTrees methodology, which is another standard and a platform where carbon can be credited. So the historical baseline goes back to 2012, and it's 5-year historical baseline. You see that green line. The average is 8.2 million tons of CO2, and each year this project was able to reduce emissions, and the sum of 2017, 2018, and 2019 is above the the average, which is 13.9 million tons of CO2. So basically, the difference between 13 and 8.2 need to be paid. Of course, there are counterfactual that need to be, and there are deduction that need to be made in terms of uncertainty deduction, buffer pool deduction, leakage deduction. And all of these, then when they deduct, the tree compliant emission reductions are 7.8 million ton that this project will trade to the market and receive payment for. So the carbon market have also different mechanisms. So carbon credit, carbon market are generated from a range of mechanisms and activities. And these mechanisms and standard are methodologies, rule, governance to ensure accountability, quality, and certified carbon credits. There are three of them. One is the international one, that includes pretty much the UNFCCC, Article 6, Clean Development Mechanism. You might be familiar with that. The second one is just the domestic market, from countries, China, Australia, they have their own. And then the third one is very much the independent mechanisms. These are mostly used. And for the real world examples, one of these have been used called art trees. You can use Vera, you can use Gold Standard, American Carbon Registry, and so on. So there are so many participants in the carbon market, as you can see. So the users, stakeholders will be the carbon project, standard program or registries that I just talked about, ART, Vera, and so on. The validation body, so the third party verification that will verify the accuracy. But you should not neglect the public opinion. We should not neglect the rating agencies and some of these regulated carbon market bodies and so on. And academia in terms of designing the robust methodology to estimate carbon. And now corporate buyers rank the monitoring, reporting, and verification as the major factor in credit purchase decisions, because they don't want to buy things that are not well verified, do not have impact, and being proven, and then defensible against, for example, the greenwashing claim that we've been hearing many times. So when it comes to carbon project, there are so many requirements. The Integrity Council has provided 10 requirements that you can see from the right side. And here, let me just focus on 4 of them. So additionality, so the project has to sequester and store more carbon than the business as usual or baseline scenario. So permanence, that's to be over time. Measurability, it has to be well measured so that the benefit can be calculated, and then non-leakage, meaning that you don't need to displace emissions from the project area to area where there is no project. And those are very important key factors. One of the most important one, actually, the additionality, can be seen in this example, for example, where the dot orange line are actually the activities, the business as usual. If the same activity continues, you will see trees being reduced. But when you implement agroforestry, improve forest management, you will actually increase carbon stocks. And on the right is very much a real world example that has been published, actually, where over time you start recovering trees in a very highly degraded lands. So agroforestry actually can be very attractive for farmers because it generates a bit of more economic benefits by selling forest carbon. So let me recap. So agroforestry is a win-win solution for nature climate solution for government, private sector, and landowners alike. However, when it comes to connecting agroforestry project to carbon market, there are several key steps that you need to keep in mind. You need to design and plan for it, where you can get practices and go to sequester carbon. You need to have a baseline assessment You need to choose the strong and recognize carbon standard to ensure that the methodologies are robust. You need the third-party auditors to validate the project design and the methodology and confirm if it complies with carbon standard. You need to implement activities strongly on the ground so that you can generate those carbon. You need to regularly monitor your performance. And then before you sell this, you need a third-party verification to assess that the carbon sequestration is real. And then the carbon will be once they are verified, the carbon credit can be issued, and then you can bring it to carbon market. Of course, you need to adapt and continue improvement as you receive feedback from different auditors and other experts. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to more discussions. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was muted there accidentally. But thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciated your video, and it was really enriching talk. So I saw in the chat that we were having some connectivity issues. Some participants and attendees were having them, others were not. But as a reminder, we will be posting these videos on YouTube, so you will be able to access that recording, hopefully in a clearer way with no blurs and no issues, and we'll make sure to verify that. So on to our second speaker of the day. We have Emma van de Ven. So let me share my screen here and we can learn a little bit more about her. So Emma is joining us here today, and we'll talk about making the carbon markets work for agroforestry. Emma van de Ven leads Rabobank's Innovation Strategy, Knowledge, and Networks team, which is a team dedicated to making regenerative agriculture attainable and financially viable to Rabobank's clients. Emma is one of Acorn's co-founders, and she has extensive experience in unlocking climate finance, voluntary carbon markets, and supply chain decarbonization for the agriculture sector. It's also worth noting that Emma is a past participant of ELTI's online restoration and agroforestry short course back in 2021. So welcome back, Emma. It is great to see you again, and we're so excited to see what you have to share. While our team gets that video up, hopefully without blurs, would you like to unmute and share a little bit or say hi?
Yes, absolutely. It's really great to be back with ELTI. I can imagine that many of the participants today have also either participated in one of the courses or would be interested to do so. I come from an engineering background, and so innovation strategy is in my blood. I've learned a lot about regenerative agriculture and especially decarbonization over the last many years, and really learning more about the intricacies of how forests develop has been the cherry on top of the pie for me. It's been a really great experience so far, and I'm still learning. So I'm also really interested to hear your questions and to engage with you after the video. So thanks a lot for participating.
No, thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to have you here. And that video should be up soon. All right, I see it as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma van de Ven. I work for Rabobank, and thank you for joining me in the story of how to make the carbon markets work for agroforestry. I'm happy to take you through the story of what we've done within Rabobank with the Acorn program. You've already heard Siko talk about the way that we optimize agroforestry also for carbon benefits, and I will tell you more about how that translates into actual market value. The first question is probably, why is Rabobank involved in this? We are a Dutch bank founded by Dutch farmers, but we are globally the leading food and agribusiness bank in the world. And that means that with our motto of growing a better world together, we focus mainly on healthy, sustainable food supply chains. And so we have a position where we finance throughout supply chains from the farmers all the way until the B2C producing companies. And with those clients, we can really make a difference in the world of food and ag. Speaking of making a difference in the world, one of our major concerns, not just as a food and agri bank, but as a global citizen, is climate change. And like I said, we focus a lot on agriculture. Agriculture is a major contributor to climate change, but it also holds the potential to mitigate climate change. And so looking at our climate change mitigations, if we want to stay on our path to 1.5 degrees increase, we are looking at specific methodologies, both for emission reduction, but also carbon removals. And as part of Rabobank's mission to really contribute to a livable future planet, we are not just investing in reducing our emissions, but in parallel, we're also investing in, you can see on the bottom, the nature-based removals. And we use the instruments that are highlighted in blue of the voluntary carbon market and supply chain insetting. Now, throughout this presentation, I'll tell you more about these concepts. This is also why I say carbon markets. There are multiple instruments we can use to achieve more carbon removals and take more CO2 out of the atmosphere and turn it into biomass and O2. But why and where should we start was the real question. Now, you can imagine that from your work already, you know a lot about climate change and the impact on agriculture and forestry. What we saw throughout our network of organizations that we finance that are sourcing from smallholder farmers, that there was an increasing pressure on smallholder farmers from climate change. They are the first to really feel it globally. And as our position as an agricultural bank, we really felt like we were lagging in offering solutions to smallholder farmers because we don't finance them directly. And so, as you already know, and I won't bore you with more details, agroforestry can provide an amazing climate change adaptation solution for smallholder farmers. But it also contributes to climate change mitigation, because the more trees grow, the more they sequester CO2 out of the atmosphere. And so thinking back to that slide about the way that we have to reduce and add removals to stay below 1.5 degrees, agroforestry can play a very important role in both supporting farmer livelihoods as well as contributing to climate change mitigation. Then the question is, why is there not more money going towards smallholder agroforestry projects? There are many reasons, and especially when it comes to developmental finance and the amount of that going to agriculture, there are a lot of hurdles experienced, especially by smallholder farmers, to achieve that finance. Today, I'm going to dive into the access to voluntary carbon markets and why we haven't seen many programs that have actually successfully latched onto that market and how to make money off of that. And so what we've done is we looked at the different barriers that farmers, especially smallholder farmers, are experiencing when they want to actually turn that climate change mitigation contribution of sequestering additional carbon on their land into carbon credits or carbon removal units that can be used towards supply chain carbon accounting. Now, what we saw is that the buyers, of course, buy the carbon credits, and then the transparency on what happens with those credits is very important to the buyers. This is brokered by intermediaries who take a percentage of that carbon credit price. Then part of the budget needs to go to validators to make sure that the right data is shared. Then a large chunk of that price that the buyers paid goes to certifiers. And then the certifiers have to pay the project developers, which charge hourly wages. So I purposefully made the lowest bar on this flowchart of farmers very light, because there's normally hardly any cash ending up with the farmers if they even manage to connect to any of these carbon markets. Now, for Acorn, this was a big challenge. So what we did, we said, we will turn the sequestered carbon that smallholder farmers sequester in their agroforestry systems into fair additional farmer income. And so we call them carbon removal units. I will be referencing CRUs later in this presentation. You can see the very simple flowchart. These trees, compared to the earlier picture that I showed, are bigger and therefore have sequestered more carbon and turned CO2 into carbon and O2. Those units can be, of course, sold if quantified, verified, and certified correctly and brought to the right buyers. So how do we do this, turning sequestered carbon into fair additional farmer income? We start with remote sensing. Measurement of carbon sequestration has been very difficult, and remote sensing has really offered a solution to this difficulty in quantifying the on-farm carbon removal. So we wrote our own methodology. This is the cover page. You can look it up on the Acorn website. I'll make sure you get access to that. The methodology maps out how we use remote sensing, which correction factors we use, and basically what assurances there are for every single carbon removal unit being measured according to the highest standard. We are unique in this. Globally, there is not another program that is able to measure on-farm, year-on-year growth of ecosystems and turn that into, at this level of assurance, removal units. And so we've developed this methodology and the corresponding models basically to close that gap between the verification and the intermediaries and take out part of those dollars lost between the sales price and the farmer at the end of the chain. So in order to train that model, we've collected different types of data. I won't go into too much detail, but what we did is collect, let's call it copious amounts of ground truth data. And as a bank, as a cooperative bank with a very long-term perspective, we were able to invest heavily in this because this is a limiting factor. So the on-farm measurements of trees and LiDAR data combined with satellite imagery, they define how good your model will be. And so the more data you put in of high quality, the better your model will become. Investing in this has been a very strategic decision because we want to be able to service as many farmers as possible globally. It's also one of the reasons why I said earlier, it's very difficult for other companies to achieve this level of assurance. Then next to that, we also developed the Acorn framework. And I mentioned certifiers in the list of costs in creating carbon credits. Developing our own framework has been a game changer because we are able to onboard farmers across the world in one program. And this has decimated the cost of certification. Plan Vivo is our certifier. Plan Vivo specializes in smaller communities, in indigenous communities, and they were very keen to work with us because of that remote sensing approach, because of the scalability, and because of our willingness to invest in these types of programs. So by developing our own certification approach, we're able to cut down a lot of the cost of certification too. Now, we put everything on our registry. And again, that's available on the Acorn website. I'll come back to this little globe later, but you can see in the top left corner, carbon removal unit and a specific number. Every single number corresponds with a plot, and that plot corresponds with a name of a farmer. And all of the details about that carbon removal unit are publicly available. And this is to ensure even better quality and transparency for the buyers. Buyers have been notoriously difficult to reach for smallholder farmers. And again, this is where we take another of those barriers away by not requiring a broker or an intermediary between the farmer and the buyer. So basically what we say, we connect the farmers to buyers for a minimum price of 20 euros per ton of carbon removals. Our current market price is set at 35 euros. This corresponds roughly to $33. Now on the right side, you see that this can be used both for insetting and for offsetting. I also referenced the two different markets that farmers can connect with, that buyers can originate from. And so when farmers would be looking for a buyer, there's a choice to be made. But it doesn't matter which type of buyer it is, if it's an insetting or an offsetting buyer, I'll explain later what that is, the price will be the same. So we make sure that the farmers get the highest price possible and that multiple markets compete with each other for the same product, which drives up the price further and brings more benefit to the farmer. So what's the difference between insetting and offsetting? The real details are in accounting, and I won't dive into the depth of that, but roughly said, we can split the market in a few different categories. So the first question is, what's the farmer's relationship to the buyer? Is the farmer outside of the supply chain? Then the buyer can only use the carbon removal units for offsetting purposes. Then if the farmer is within the supply chain, the buyer could use the carbon removal units for offsetting purposes or insetting purposes. Then their accounting decisions define which one of the two it is. So if the buyer wants to use the carbon removal units for their corporate company emissions, it will be offsetting. So on the other hand, if the buyer wants to use the carbon removal units for product emissions, linking the removals of carbon on the field to the products that they purchase from the farmers within their supply chain, this can be used as insetting. An example I put down here in small letters is a coffee supply chain collectively purchases their farmers' carbon removal units to sell low carbon coffee. You can imagine that adding the removals into the emission inventory of that coffee can significantly lower the net emissions. What that would look like in practice, I'll show on the next slide. On the left example, you see how the carbon removal units are accounted for as offsets and balancing out the CO2 emissions. On the right side of the slide, you see the carbon removal being part of the inventory of the cup of coffee at the end of the supply chain. And so it depends what the farmer decides where the carbon accounting will take place. And the farmer can decide if they want an offsetting buyer or an insetting buyer. And either way, they will achieve the highest price. But the price is not the only thing that's important. It's also how we share that price. Coming back to that funnel of what it takes to create a carbon removal unit, going back, how much money does actually end up with the farmer? In the case of Acorn, 80% of the sales price, not the net profit, sales price of the carbon removal unit in the market ends up with the farmer. 10% we go to the local partner who helps us onboard the farmers, and 10% goes to Acorn for certification, verification, remote sensing, finding the right buyers, etc. So far, we have achieved onboarding more than 300,000 farmers. Now, not all of those have up and running agroforestry systems. So some of these farmers are still in the planting phase. That's not why everybody has generated many carbon removal units. It takes a few years, as you've already learned. But looking at these farmers, on average, they have roughly 1 hectare of land. And that means that across the globe, as you can see now, looking specifically at the part where nothing much is happening because it's the Pacific Ocean, across 3 continents, we have onboarded in more than 15 countries, and we're very proud of that. So to summarize why this is interesting for Rabobank and why we invest in this is the transition to sustainable and resilient supply chains for food. For farmers, it's the climate change adaptation and livelihoods. On a regional level, these programs contribute to food security and to biodiversity and land restoration. And of course, on a global level, we need to achieve climate change mitigation. So far, 9 companies are using Acorn for offsetting purposes, and 10 companies are working with Acorn for insetting purposes. Now, thank you for your attention. I look forward to all of your questions. And I would like to say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you so much to both of our speakers. And very, very interesting topics. Really great to really dive into them in more context. And please join me, everyone, in the Zoom world to extend our gratitude to Emma and Peter for dedicating their time today to work with us throughout the preparation of this, for being present in here today to address some of our questions, as you may have noticed kind of going on in chat. I like to see all of the Zoom reactions as well. Those emojis are so fun. But speaking of some questions, we are nearing the end of our sessions, but do have time to go through some of the Q&A that has been going on today. Feel free to put some of your inquiries into the Q&A function here in Zoom, and we'll get started with a couple of those. And I see that you have both Emma and Peter here have been answering some of those in chat, but I am going to ask you guys maybe to read some of your answers out loud so that anyone who comes to view some of our YouTube videos is able to see those as well. So let's get started. We also have a point brought up by Lematifi saying that the availability of high quality satellite image is a challenge. So how can some small stakeholders kind of address the issue of accessing some of this data? Emma or Peter, would you like to start?
Yeah, happy to start on that because I think satellite data is core to what Acorn can do. The key question is really how do you measure your carbon removals? And so the Acorn model is using a lot of on-the-ground measurements, like I've shown in the video, to train a model that in the end uses readily available, not too expensive satellite data, or very often free data, of satellites that continuously fly around the world and continuously take pictures. And so if on one moment there's, let's say, it's rainy season, there's a lot of clouds, we can use other moments in time to get clear images of regions that might be more difficult to reach. So the Acorn model is not built on commercial satellite data. So it's not the fact that you can zoom in like you could in Google Maps and really see on the smallest pixel level every single detail on the ground. But it's more, it's benchmarked on a little bit more coarse data. But by training the models extensively, we can still use that coarse data and a continuous measurement over time to get accurate measurements down to roughly half a hectare, down to a tenth of a hectare plot. So it's a very detailed plot, small plot size. But because of this extensive training data and the very smart models, we can use the satellite imagery that is continuously available as opposed to commercial satellite data that you have to fly over specifically, which is a lot more expensive as well. I will link the Acorn methodology in the chat, which also explains more about what sort of data is used to train the models. I am not the engineer behind this, as you can hear from the way I explain this, but I'm trying to explain it in a way that is accessible to everyone.
Great, thank you, Emma. Peter, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not really, but yeah, let's just take a couple points. I guess that's the reason why in my presentation I keep insisting about monitoring, reporting, and verification, because that's really the carbon accounting. I believe when the RED Plus and all this carbon market started, it was very difficult to get the data, especially going from small scale to a bit of a large scale. And more we start seeing high resolution satellite imagery to come and support this kind of process. Because if you just do your inventory by yourself, by hand and things in terms of agroforestry, it can be easy. But if you look at this in a larger scale, it can be difficult to do it manually. So I think on top of what Emma is talking about, I think there are so many now satellite imagery that are available. One of those coming from the Norway government has put planet data where it's available for countries, and this could be used. But another thing what I was doing when I was looking at my PhD was also taking advantage of the new technology. So drones, for example, can also help in terms of monitoring this, because it's taking a very high resolution images and photos for farms and so on that can be now used using regression models, allometric equations, and so on, and then calculate that to have more comprehensive estimate. So that's what I wanted just to add. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you for your addition. Very helpful. And I like that point about drones, especially in areas where it's tough to get high resolution satellite images. We have another question from Renato. And his question is, what are the possibilities of certification for farmers that have already been practicing agroforestry and in countries where agroforestry is already a common practice? Specifically, he asks this question because of the requirements of additionality. Peter, would you like to start with that one?
Yes, sure. I guess there is one thing that has been discussed a little bit in terms of a carbon market, where they say maybe we reward bad student over good student, right? So, and those discussions have been quite going on so many times. However, I guess the point is that some of these countries, farmers, let's talk about farmers because we're talking about agroforestry. If you look at my slide, I had a very comprehensive slide when I said the adoption, where there is no existing agroforestry practice, and also where there is existing agroforestry practice. So it really means that where there is existing agroforestry practice, what they will be looking at is whether you maintain those practices and you continuously increase carbon stocks in your farm, right? So that's the additionality. It means really you've been doing this over time and you will continue to do it. And if you were to do something wrong, then it will be less than the stock that you have. So there is a continuously improve management, but also reducing the risk of these trees to be removed. So you do the conservation. And that's where you demonstrate your additionality to get paid. But the other thing is also sometimes the carbon market payment can go backwards. It means really that you can be paid for past emissions as opposed to the current emissions or future emissions. In the condition where you'll be paid for past emissions, then you will have to demonstrate your historical. So what was the situation when you started the project, and what is the situation after you implement your agroforestry practices to get those carbon benefits and other benefits. So it's basically it's both sides, whether it's a past emission or future emissions, you will still get additionality because you maintain the practices, you reduce the risk of removal of the trees, and then you increase your carbon stocks. I don't know if that's respond to your question. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. Emma, is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I think the nuance between retroactive and ex post credits versus ex ante credits is very important. What we see is specifically in developing countries where maybe farmers have already received some sort of investment to start adopting agroforestry practices, but they are struggling to keep keep their ecosystems healthy and, let's say, protected from animals, from poachers, anything like that, or the systems need more watering. For those specific cases, we could argue that actually those payments for ecosystem services can still help to keep up the system because it would otherwise fail. And so under specific circumstances, it could be possible. However, the question asked, if it's already common practice everywhere, then additionality is a bit more tricky to prove. So it's a subjective situation. And I think there is no clear-cut answer. However, it might be worth it. I put already the Acorn website in the chat. If you really have a project that you think could be eligible, please approach us through the website. There's a contact form, and you can specify that you might have a project. And then we can look at it case by case, because there is no clear-cut answer when it comes to additionality, unfortunately.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emma. I want to actually continue on a little bit with you. We have a question from Alexandria Clement, and she asks, is the payment of 80% to farmers a direct payment, or does it go into a fund? Many organizations seem to be offering a percentage to farms, that goes into a, what she calls, quote, business and livelihood fund, end quote. And that's managed by the local NGO. So could you walk us through a little bit of the specifics for that?
Absolutely. I love this question. And I saw that Stephen already asked a similar question, so I think I might be answering both in one go. This is something that we've seen many times. And for many of these projects, especially if they work with smaller farmers, they say, well, the benefit of the project is that the farmers can receive the investment in agroforestry systems. And so ecosystem service payments are not necessary. And this is one of the main reasons that we started Acorn, because the simple reason is if you give a farmer a coffee tree seedling, then you will still pay that farmer for the yearly coffee harvest. You don't have the right to come to their land and take away their coffee. that growing of coffee requires effort and diligent care. And it's the exact same for a growing ecosystem. So even if farmers receive some initial investments, they still would be paid every single year. And so the way Acorn deals with these payments, we work with local communities. So community councils are very important because in some communities, it is very beneficial to the people there to have, let's say, a group payout to repave the roads or to create water systems or to build schools. And the local community council, really that's run by the farmers themselves, they decide how the money will be paid. Now we say that maximum 50% of that 80% can be paid out in kind. But we still want some cash to flow to every single farmer. And so because we can do the measurement, sorry, that was my laptop making a little ding.
That's okay. We're also getting emails too, so it
Yeah.
happens.
But because we can measure on every single plot for each individual farmer what their contribution was, what the yearly growth in biomass was, we can pay out every single farmer individually. So we know what they contributed. And this is the part of Acorn that's very important to understand. We really want to reward farmers that do their very best to take care of their ecosystems. And that payout is transparent. We monitor everything either through digital payments, if that's a common practice in the country, or through completely transferable bank payments, if the farmers have bank accounts, or, and it's the worst case scenario, but it's still something we diligently do, cash payouts with proof and receipts and everything for every single of those 300,000 farmers and counting. And so we really hope that more countries will be adopting digital payments because that's by far the easiest and the most traceable system, but we make do with what we have.
Excellent. Peter, I wonder if you have anything to add. Are you seeing a similar payment system, whether it's direct or going into a fund, in some of the work that GEF does?
Not really. I think the comprehensive response from Emma is actually the best because they have a real world example with what they're trying to implement as Rabobank. So I will just second what she said. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So I think we have time for about one more question. And just as a reminder for everyone joining us today, if we have not gotten to your question, we are compiling and copying them down so that we can address them during the Q&A that is occurring next week, same time and date. So just I want to go into a little bit about the question that you've already answered in the chat, Peter. The question was regarding carbon sequestration, and that's a very dynamic process in an ecosystem. So how does this affect long-term carbon credit calculations? And you can pretty much repeat kind of what you've written in the chat, but if you want to add anything out loud, feel free to do so. Oh, Peter, we still have you on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, so I think I can just summarize what I wrote in the chart because it's a bit of a long answer. Of course, the carbon sequestration involved, as we already demonstrated through different webinars and presentation, which is capturing and storing CO2 emission in the atmosphere. And the variability of that that function can be influenced by many factors, as I said. Sometimes it's the land use practices, but also it can be some natural events, right? So that variability really impact the reliability of long-term carbon credit calculations, which then requires that the project should really be a true net reduction of carbon of CO2 emissions. So if you really want to mitigate the risk of releasing the carbon that has already been sequestered, then invalidate the carbon credit, because if you already have the carbon that has been sequestered, and then if it is removed, that means your credit can be invalidated. So that means that the long-term calculation then will be to safeguard the carbon that you already sequestered through ongoing monitoring. So I think the understanding here is basically that when the method, because the methodology has been involved and so on, but the calculation must also be refined so that it can maintain accuracy and effectiveness with the real world situation, whether there is a factor that will influence those calculations or not. So I think it's basically the ongoing monitoring that is very important here, and maintain the practices that will maintain the volume that we already achieved. Thanks.
Excellent. No, thank you. Emma, is there anything you want to add on that topic? Nope. Okay.
Very clear.
Yes, I agree. Excellent. So I think we are just at about time. I did want to note the poll that we had done in the beginning, and we actually had 100% of the participants answer the poll, which is really amazing. And we hope that those of you who are new to this topic, which is about 30% of the attendees here, have learned a lot through this webinar series. And we hope to see you next week, and we look forward to all of that. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to just point out we have a couple announcements before we leave. So let me just share my screen for one quick moment here. So don't forget, we do have a website and we do have an events page and mailing list. If you are interested in any of our future activities or want to keep up to date on what ELTI is doing, please feel free to visit our webpage and subscribe to our mailing list to stay updated on all of those upcoming activities. Oops, went a little too fast there. But as we've spoken a lot today, please check out our YouTube channel. We will be posting today's recording, as well as we already have the previous 2 weeks recording posted on our YouTube channel. Feel free to check us out there. And then also, please, please, please join us next week on April 25th, same time, at our Q&A session and discussion on the webinar themes with all our panelists, or most of them at least, and maybe some additional guests. And then finally, that will be moderated by Fred Aday, who is our postgraduate associate joining us here today. We'd like to end on behalf of the Agroforestry and Carbon Webinar Planning Committee. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We extend our sincerest gratitude to everyone who joined us today, particularly our 2 guests, Emma and Peter. Thank you so much. If you have any questions or you'd like to get some more information, please visit our website or email us here. You can contact us at tropicalcertificate@yale.edu. We look forward to seeing you at the same time next week. Thank you and take care, everyone.